The Japanese government says there's been no word on the fate of 2 hostages being held by the terrorist group Islamic State in Syria. Plea for mercy. The Prime Minister Tony Abbott asks Indonesia to spare 2 Bali 9 members from the firing squad. Roads closed and dramatic rescues after a massive rain system sweeps across southeast Queensland.
And coming up on the drum, she's worked tirelessly for adoption law reform in Australia. Our guest is Australian of the Year nominee and founder of advocacy group Adopt Change, Deborah Lee Furness.
Hello, you're watching ABC News. I'm Rachel Pupazzoni. The deadline for the ransom of 2 Japanese hostages taken by Islamic State has now passed. The Japanese government had been given until just over 3 hours ago to deliver the $200 million ransom. The country's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga told reporters a short time ago that there'd been no message from the militants, describing the situation as very severe. Earlier, the mother of one of the hostages, Kenji Goto, made a last-minute plea for her son's life. On Tuesday, Islamic State militants released a video of a man dressed from head to toe in black, standing between 2 hostages wearing orange jumpsuits. The Prime Minister has again pleaded for the lives of 2 of the Bali 9 drug traffickers after their appeals for clemency were rejected. Tony Abbott says Andrew Chan and Miran Sukumaran are reformed characters who deserve mercy and not the firing squad. Their Australian lawyer hasn't given up hope and he's preparing one final legal appeal. Indonesia correspondent George Roberts reports.
Behind the walls and the watchtowers here at Bali's infamous Kerobokan prison, Andrew Chan is coming to terms with the fact that he's been denied a presidential pardon. Now he and his fellow Australian death row inmate, Miran Sukumaran, are facing the grim prospect that they could be executed within weeks.
News of Chan's failed bid to avoid the firing squad was delivered by a court official, a formal document bearing the president's name. The drug smuggler's Australian lawyer found Chan in the prison shortly after news of the decision reached him.
He had just been told that he was going to be taken out and shot pretty soon. When I found him, he was actually nursing a very sick prisoner and cradling him in his arms, just looking after him.
He says it's clear the men are reformed.
Good kids who made terrible mistakes, they should be in jail for their crimes, but they shouldn't be executed. Despite
that, they're taking the news in their stride.
It's very sobering. Both of them were very sober for a while, but they just got on and did things in a most gracious and dignified way. It was just amazing to watch. They're handling it pretty well.
The Prime Minister's again appealed to the Indonesian government. In a statement he said, "While Australia respects Indonesia's sovereignty, we are asking that Indonesia reconsider its decision to execute 2 Australian citizens. Both men are reformed characters and both men have helped to rehabilitate other prisoners. The prerogative of mercy should be extended to them." But Indonesia isn't interested in what other countries think of its laws and its harsh stance on drugs. So Julian McMahon's hoping to use that.
We're on about the rule of law here. The Constitutional Court says we can go into the court and make another appeal, and we have very strong legal arguments to do it. So that's what we want to do. We want to use the rule of law to assist my clients and reduce their penalty.
It may be their only hope.
But it enters a hazy area of Indonesian law, and it's dubious whether the ploy will work. The Supreme Court, which hears judicial reviews, is of the opinion that people only get one. Chan and Sukumaran have already tried that avenue and failed. And the Constitutional Court has told ABC News that despite its decision that people should be afforded more than one review, the President's word on the matter is still final, and the government already has the authority to go ahead with the executions.
Southeast Queensland has been soaked in the biggest rain event since ex-tropical cyclone Oswald 2 years ago. Emergency crews rescued a number of people from flooded roads, and the State Emergency Service was inundated with calls for help.
As the creeks and rivers swelled, emergency crews swung into action. Swiftwater rescue teams battled floodwaters to save this man who was trapped on the roof of his car at Benogan in the Gold Coast hinterland.
Get ready! We're in the water!
Any rescue can be difficult, okay? Just we've got trained personnel here that know exactly what they're trying to achieve, and we've got to have it as safely as we possibly can.
I'm very thankful, mate. Very thankful. There's no way I was getting through that water.
At Helensvale, people on the street stopped to rescue a couple from their car.
Has someone got a chair or something?
They were left shaken but safe. Low-lying inner-city streets in Brisbane were swamped as king tides peaked at midday. It was a similar scene on the south side where water lapped at footpaths. This is the heaviest and most widespread rain in 2 years, and at least another 100 millimetres of rain is expected to fall along the coast overnight.
There will be localised flooding of roads. There will be very significant flooding of local creeks and stormwater drains.
Southeast Queensland has already seen more than its average rainfall for the month. While it's heavy along the coastline, most of the drought-affected interior have missed out.
This system developed along central Queensland. On the western side, there was not much activity at all.
The Weather Bureau is expecting the low-pressure system to take several hours to pass as the weekend approaches.
Generally fine conditions. The heavy rain should go away, but there will be some showers and isolated storms here and there along the east coast.
Just in time for Australia Day. Josh Bavis, ABC News, Brisbane.
The battle over workplace relations is being revived. The Productivity Commission has begun its wide-ranging review of the industrial landscape, giving the Abbott government another fraught policy issue to navigate. Here's political reporter Melissa Clark.
In hospitality, service counts. That means more staff and more wages, and that costs.
We find that on public holidays we're having to reduce our numbers and even reducing some of the facilities and services that we have available.
For this hotel, the wide-ranging review commissioned by the government is welcome.
So if we're able to look at reviewing the public holiday rates, then it gives us the opportunity to have those services available and also to employ some more staff.
With everything on the table for discussion, the unions and Labor are preparing for another battle.
It's another example, we think, of the Abbott government trying to lower the living standards of all Australians.
Tony Abbott wrote the book on work choices. Tony Abbott still wants to attack the minimum wage and penalty rates in this country.
The Employment Minister sought to allay concerns.
Nobody wants Australia to be a low-wage country with a race to the bottom.
But the Prime Minister may have fuelled them, dismissing workers' concerns about losing penalty rates.
If you don't want to work on a weekend, fair enough, don't work on a weekend.
The Coalition has promised to take any changes to industrial relations to the next election. Some in the Coalition are pushing for an overhaul. But with the Prime Minister's support flagging, there's little political capital left to spend on another divisive issue. Melissa Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
Convicted terrorist David Hicks could have his name cleared within weeks. His lawyer says the United States government has agreed the former Guantanamo Bay inmate is innocent and the charge against him invalid.
David Hicks spent 5 years in Guantanamo Bay. After being captured in Afghanistan, he was convicted in 2007 for providing material support for terrorism. His lawyer says the United States has now had a change of heart.
They've acknowledged that his conviction cannot stand, and that means that they've acknowledged that David's innocent.
The Australian pleaded guilty, but his legal team say he did so under extreme duress and filed an appeal last year. The charge against him was introduced retrospectively, years after his arrest.
To be quite frank, if I was in solitary confinement in Guantanamo Bay and I'd been there for 5 years, I'd probably have pleaded guilty to a lot more than what David did to get out of there.
It's now up to the Military Commission to quash his conviction.
David's the one that's been suffering, and so hopefully now he can have a bit of closure and really get on with his life.
There were 2 times probably in this process that I felt any sort of satisfaction, and it was probably one when David left Guantanamo, and it'll be the day that they actually officially remove his conviction.
In a statement, David Hicks said it's been a long time coming and described his years in Guantanamo Bay as unfortunate. While the Australian government is yet to comment, Stephen Kenny believes David Hicks deserves an apology.
They should apologise for supporting the Americans for taking people to Guantanamo Bay and taking them beyond the law.
A decision on whether the Military Commission will quash David Hicks's conviction is expected within the next month. And based on previous cases, it seems there will be little chance for compensation. Nicola Gage, ABC News, Adelaide.
Yemen is in crisis, with rebel forces seizing the presidential palace and taking the country's president as a virtual prisoner. The Iranian-backed Houthis have had control of the capital for 4 months. It's believed President Abdarrahman Mansour Hadi resigned after being threatened when fighters barricaded the parliament. He remains under house arrest in his official residence, but Yemen's parliament has refused to accept the president's resignation and will soon meet for an emergency session. President Hadi has faced opposition for allowing US airstrikes against al-Qaeda targets in Yemen. The US Secretary of State John Kerry says coalition airstrikes in Syria and Iraq have stopped or reversed the momentum of Islamic State militants. Speaking after talks in London between more than 20 coalition states, he said about half the group's leaders have been killed since strikes began in August. But as North America correspondent Ben Knight reports, Iraq's Prime Minister has warned falling oil prices could hurt the country's fighting capacity.
This week, Iraq's Prime Minister fired a broadside at his allies, saying it's taking them too long to train and arm Iraqi soldiers.
We expect much more from the international community to side with Iraq.
The American Defense Secretary is not impressed.
We have a coalition of over 60 countries that have come together to help Iraq. And I think the Prime Minister might want to be a little more mindful of that.
But Haider al-Abadi arrived in London to a far more welcoming atmosphere.
A very warm welcome, Prime Minister Abadi, to...
Sitting down with 21 of the key coalition partners, including Australia, to talk about progress against Islamic State, or Daesh.
So we have seen definitively Daesh's momentum halted in Iraq, and in some cases reversed.
The US says coalition airstrikes have helped Iraqi forces recapture hundreds of square kilometres of territory, kill thousands of Islamic State fighters, including half of its top commanders. Leaders say more can be done to stop the flow of funds and fighters to Islamic State. But Iraq says its efforts are being hit by the falling price of oil.
Iraqi economy and budget relies 85% on oil, and this has been disastrous for us.
This campaign is not going to fail for the want of some guns or some bullets.
But all agree it will take much more than that to win it. Ben Knight, ABC News, Washington.
The Egyptian president says he's trying to sort out the case of the jailed Australian journalist Peter Gresta. In an interview, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said he wanted a legal solution to the detention of Mr Gresta and 2 other Al Jazeera journalists. There's been speculation the trio could receive a presidential pardon. Egypt is reportedly planning to pardon more than 500 prisoners this weekend. Tasmania's Director of Public Prosecutions has been sacked almost 2 years after causing a fatal accident on the Midland Highway. Tim Ellis was given a 4-month suspended jail sentence last month after losing his death by negligent driving appeal.
It's a move without precedent in Tasmania. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Tim Ellis, has been sacked.
I determined to advise the Governor to remove Mr Ellis from the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions on the grounds of misbehaviour.
Mr Ellis's removal takes effect immediately.
It's been nearly 2 years since the fatal accident that killed Natalia Pern. Ellis was on the wrong side of the Midland Highway and was convicted of causing death by negligent driving. He lost an appeal and was given a 4-month suspended jail sentence in December. He was also disqualified from driving for 2 years.
We understand that there is significant public interest and concern.
Tim Ellis has held the office of DPP for 15 years. The Attorney-General says community confidence was central to her decision.
If confidence is eroded in the office of the DPP, confidence in the criminal justice system will be undermined. That is why it was so important to act and protect the integrity of the office.
I think it would have been very difficult for Mr Ellis with a suspended sentence hanging over his head to continue in the role, whether that would have been appearing in court or even just discharging his responsibilities.
Tim Ellis has declined to comment publicly, and it's unclear whether he'll dispute the decision.
Mr Ellis may have certain rights under the Judicial Review Act, but I can't comment any further than that.
He's been no stranger to controversy. Mr Ellis prosecuted Police Commissioner Jack Johnston, who was later cleared of disclosing official secrets, and he became involved in a public slanging match with Premier David Bartlett about the reappointment of Richard McCready as Commissioner. The Attorney-General's focused on reforming the DPP Act to deal with the life tenure of the position and the obligation to provide full pay to statutory officers suspended from duty.
At present, there is no legal power to suspend the Director of Public Prosecutions without pay, and the government intends to look into this.
Tim Ellis will not receive a payout, but he will get his accrued entitlements, which amount to almost $300,000. Anna Fromberg, ABC News.
The New South Wales Government has announced it's considering scrapping the statute of limitations that currently prevents many survivors of child sexual abuse from suing for damages. Victims, advocates and lawyers have welcomed the news, saying the court process is traumatic enough without a time limit being imposed on people coming forward.
John was 13 when he was repeatedly abused at the Woodlands Boys' Home near Newcastle in 1965.
The so-called volunteer who'd come and help out actually raped me in the toilet, in the shower, and I reported it that day to the matron, and all I got back was a backhander across the face.
It took decades before he felt able to report the abuse again, taking him well outside the statute of limitations.
There's an allowance of between 3 and 12 years for survivors to come forward, and we know from the Royal Commission interim report that on average it takes 22 years for a survivor to disclose.
That means they're not going to be able to speak up, and their offenders, if they're still alive, are going to get away with it.
Stories like this at the ongoing Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse have prompted the state government to act.
There's a discussion paper out. We're hoping the community will support us on it.
The public's being asked to provide submissions on whether to reduce or remove the legal time limit.
Those who have actually had these torturous moments in their lives, those people are the people we'd really like to hear from. But, you know, there are others, the representative groups and so on. Indeed, the organisations who might be on the receiving end.
If the changes do go through, lawyers don't expect the courts to be flooded with cases and claims.
All we're doing is removing one impediment, and that in itself is only one factor as to whether a claim would proceed.
The Royal Commission will turn its focus next to Knox Grammar, examining conduct and abuse at the private school between 1970 and 2012. Hearings examining the North Shore Boys' School start next month. Lucy Carter, ABC News, Sydney.
It's Sydney's most notorious house of hoarders and it's on the market. The Bondi home of Mary Bobolas is being sold, even though it's full of rubbish and her family's refusing to leave.
The auction sign went up this morning, offering an opportunity to buy a property that the council calls a rubbish-strewn, vermin-filled fire and health hazard. It's being sold by the New South Wales Sheriff to recover the $180,000 clean-up bill.
And in the last 20 years, councils had to clean up this property 15 times. And it's not fair that the residents and ratepayers of Waverley are having to foot the bill.
Every time Waverley Council wins an order to clean up the home, the owner, Mary Bobolas, and her two daughters work to bring back the garbage as fast as they can.
Section 200 of the Local Government Act 1993 prohibits entry onto any premises used for residential purposes without permission of the occupier.
The house is being sold just for land value, but that hasn't dampened interest.
We've been overwhelmed with the inquiry. We listed the property yesterday at 5:30 online. Since 9:15 this morning, we've had over 53 inquiries and 11 contracts called for.
The family is still living in the property and prospective buyers are being warned in the contract for sale that it'll be their responsibility to evict them after the purchase goes through.
Whilst the neighbours will be breathing a sigh of relief when they're gone, 2 Waverley councillors oppose the forced sale on the grounds that it'll only move the problem somewhere else. David Spicer, ABC News, Bondi.
Bernard Tomic has won his way into the 4th round of the Australian Open with a straight sets win over compatriot Sam Groth. In a rare all-Australian 3rd round match, Tomic trumped the tournament's ace leader 6-4, 7-6, 6-3 to book a last 16 showdown on Sunday with 7th seed Thomas Burditch. Tomic and Groth did not disappoint, both serving at over 70% for much of the match. Nick Kyrgios also enjoyed success, defeating Malek Jaziri in straight sets. Meanwhile, 4-time Australian Open champion Roger Federer won't be making it 5 after crashing out of the event in a surprise loss in the 3rd round at Melbourne Park. Unseeded Italian Andrea Seppi produced the shock of the tournament in a 4-set win over Federer. Last night, Leighton Hewitt gave up a 2-set lead to go down to Benjamin Becker, and Sam Stosur's Open also came to an end.
Men's 2nd seed Roger Federer was feeling the love before his match today, but he was hitting souvenirs instead of winners. Italian Andreas Seppi stunned the favourite as he seized the early control.
Well, I didn't think I'd be saying this. Seppi leads by a set and a break.
The match went from the unlikely to the unbelievable as Seppi snatched the 2nd set in a tiebreak.
Can you believe it?
Look at the scoreboard. You have no choice.
Federer mounted a comeback to win the 3rd set, but Seppi still had the match on his racket. And as the 4th set neared its end, the match went beyond Federer's reach, culminating in a dramatic match point for Seppi. Federer's loss was the Swiss legend's earliest exit from the Australian Open since 2001.
One of the greatest upsets we've ever seen in Melbourne.
It mightn't have been an upset last night, but after a loss in his 19th Australian Open, it's unclear if the brief campaign will be Leighton Hewitt's last.
It's a tough loss.
Just tried to focus on what I wanted to do and get the best out of myself here this year, and I'll sit back and assess everything after this tournament.
If it was a swan song, it was almost fitting. A lengthy contest where Hewitt stormed to early success, but lacked a finishing blow later in the match as Benjamin Becker came from 2 sets down to claim his first ever 5th set victory.
An historic match in lots of ways.
Sam Stosur's unfortunate habit of early exits at her home slam continued.
There it is.
As Australia's chances in the women's draw were snuffed out. Ben Lisson, ABC News, Melbourne.
The most dramatic game of this year's Asian Cup has seen Iraq progress to the semi-finals. Iran opened the scoring in the 24th minute and held the lead until Ahmed Yassin equalised for Iraq 10 minutes after half-time. Neither side could break the deadlock, so they went to extra time, where Iraq took the upper hand.
Deflections and Yunus Mahmoud! He's propped up again! The inspirational captain for Iraq!
Incredibly, 3 more goals were scored during the extra period, with Iran twice coming from behind to level things up. 3-3 is how it finished, so it came down to penalties, where Iraq won 7-6, booking a semi-final date with South Korea. The Socceroos are 2 wins away from lifting the Asian Cup after a spectacular 2-goal performance from Tim Cahill against China in Brisbane. Australia booked a semi-final against either Japan or the UAE, and Cahill's first goal is the talk of the tournament. Duncan Hunsdale reports.
As the Socceroos left Brisbane to prepare for their first game in Newcastle in 20 years, the seemingly ageless Tim Cahill was still the centre of attention, after he added another stunning highlight to a bulging CV.
And Cahill goes for the spectacular. What about that? What about that? Oh, Timmy Cahill. He is an absolute star.
Ball just flipped in the air and I reacted instinctively. And I still know I can change games. I still know I can write my own script.
He hit it perfectly.
The amount of goals he scores, you just expect him to pop up and score a spectacular goal. He's got that knack for goal and he just keeps showing it time and time again.
A trademark header effectively sealed China's fate.
Timmy Cahill
as I keep telling him, who knows, the best may be ahead of him still.
The coach hopes the victory will silence critics who questioned his decision to rest several players from the loss to South Korea.
The only challenge I see is making sure that the players in that dressing room don't limit their potential by listening to a lot of the crap that comes in from the outside.
The semis are still a great achievement with a very young and relatively inexperienced side. If you take Timmy out and maybe Milo Jedinak.
The players believe the job's far from finished.
I think the pass mark for us is winning it. We set out to win it at the start and nothing's changed.
But the Socceroos' potential next opponent, the defending champion Japan, won't see the final as a bridge too far. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
The Sydney Sixers will take on the Strikers in a Big Bash semi-final in Adelaide tomorrow night after a thrilling win over crosstown rivals the Thunder. The Sixers' Jordan Silk showcased his athleticism with a remarkable one-handed catch. He followed that up with some brilliant batting. Silk's unbeaten 69 helped the Sixers chase down the Thunder's total of 154 on the last ball of the match. Retiring fast bowler Brett Lee was given a standing ovation on his last professional game at the SCG. Heavy rain in Queensland this week has put smiles on the faces of a lot of farmers. Grass is growing again on drought-parched properties and cattle prices have shot up to record levels.
For many parts of the state, it's been a wet start to the year and graziers are reaping the benefits.
Talking to a gentleman that's been selling here for 40 years and he's never seen rates at what we're getting today.
It's helped to put confidence back into the market.
The ability for them to be able to plan for the future and know that they're getting a good return on the investments.
And returns are more than $1 a kilo higher than last year.
The steers that were making $1.40 last year this time are now making $2.40.
The higher prices are encouraging graziers to sell.
Got a few heifers in here to sell today, try and take advantage of a few of these bit better prices for once.
While the rain has helped to increase prices, it's meant not so many cattle have been able to get to the sale.
Just the rain over the last few days restricting people's ability to be able to muster and to organise cattle to get them in here.
Graziers say conditions in Queensland are better than in New South Wales.
As soon as you cross the border, it sort of starts to peter out again. The feed's not as good. Just haven't quite had the rain that they have up the north here.
New South Wales cattle producers hope that all changes as the rain-bearing system moves south. Paul Robinson, ABC News, Gracemere.
We've still got a trough set to sit across the eastern states tomorrow. Now that's going to bring some very unsettled conditions. We're looking at the potential of showers and thunderstorms through much of Queensland, potentially through New South Wales and eastern Victoria. And as this front moves up towards the southeast, that will also bring the potential of some showers across southeastern areas. The very hot air still sits through the inland of the continent, but for Queensland the good news is the heaviest of the rainfall should move out off the coast. So although there is still the potential of showers and thunderstorms in most districts, we're not expecting the widespread heavy falls that have been experienced this week. Similar story for New South Wales, potential of some showers and storms, but the heavy rain will clear from the northeastern corner overnight. And although those showers and thunderstorms could be widespread, then not all areas are going to see them. Similar story for Victoria across the north and also the eastern half. We are likely to see the potential of these showers and storms about. Now, got some isolated showers about the northwest of Tasmania. They'll spread down to the western districts as we move in towards the afternoon. And a few showers possible about the far southeast of South Australia, but elsewhere it should remain relatively dry. And for Western Australia, the southern areas should be generally clear, perhaps an isolated shower about parts of the eastern half of the south coast. Showers and storms across the north and remaining very hot through the majority of the territory, but stormy across the north coast.
And that is ABC News for now. I'm Rachel Pupazzoni. Do stay with us. The Drum is next. Thanks for watching.